Thank you, Hahom, Ron, very much. Mabrika Usawayo, greetings and good day. Today, representing Indigenous 215 is myself, Priscilla Bell Lamberti, Taino Indigenous Caribbean, and Felicia Tedder, Yakama.
So Native people are deeply tied to the land, as a lot of people have already touched on. Our tribal names usually translate to the people who live here or the people who live over there. Our cultures and cultural expression usually adapts and moves depending on our ecological boundaries and what's around us. And the land we are on influences our language, our food, our art forms, our shelters, our clothing, our tools, and literally every other aspect of our lives.
Native people are not a monolith. It's important to remember that no one person can speak for the entire nation of a people, or one group can talk for all intertribal nations of people. We are each unique people with unique views, ideas, and understandings, all from unique tribes, structures, and cultural ways. While there are many similarities between Indigenous worldview, there is also a wealth of difference to be explored. For our process, we wanted to include as many voices as possible. Next.
Native people are still here. We literally live among you. We are still defending our homelands. We are still living in our homelands. And although many people have been displaced, people are fighting for their right to go home and their right to return, and also their right to be anywhere that they are. So Native people are not just a historicized or like mythical thing. We are just literal people who are still fighting for our right to live and be free within the so-called United States.
Fellowship with the land, the past. Previous to colonization, Indigenous people lived in relationship with the land, not as owners, but as coexisting human beings. In the spirit of this philosophy, this two-row wampum represents an agreement of non-involvement between the Haudenosaunee and the Dutch, and was the basis for all treaties that followed. However, settlers did not share this relationship to the land and understood the land as a commodity to be owned. To gain ownership, the European settlers have cheated, lied to, and murdered Native people across the globe in pursuit of the land that they occupy.
Fellowship with the land, present. Instead of giving the land back, which is a great hashtag you should look at, colonial governmental structures aim to continue the systematic genocide of Indigenous peoples and cultures through political and education means, even as they claim to seek to make amends for their pasts. They restrict the movement of Indigenous people while destroying the landscape we have called home since time immemorial.
Yes, so there's two pictures here, one of the 2016 Standing Rock protests. Indigenous 215 grew out of the Philly for Standing Rock protests as Indigenous organizers realized the best people to center us are ourselves. The bottom photo is the 2017 Philly People's Climate March. The Philly People's Climate March was organized by a coalition of climate justice organizations, including Indigenous 215. And you can see the Native folks were front and center, and they were centered in this particular march.
In February 2000, Indigenous 215 and allies took action against Chase Bank in solidarity with Wet'suwet'en organizers defending their homelands against a natural gas pipeline. This fourth photo actually is not Indigenous 215, but just something cool that my friends did recently in so-called Sacramento, and a cool way to use art. They are taking a stand against Wells Fargo, which is a top target of the Stop Line 3 movement. And they actually made a mural in front of this Wells Fargo that took up the entire street and stopped traffic for the day to do that.
Fellowship with the land, what we can do in the future. Indigenous communities have the right to decide what happens in their territories and to access and steward the land.
And a way to build toward Indigenous sovereignty and correct fellowship with the land is to build relationships with Indigenous people. As we've seen today, they are Indigenous people across Lenape-Hoking who are already doing tons of work. So supporting those and actually becoming in relation with Indigenous people instead of like in a one-off kind of like, hey, we called you and that's cool. Also give resources when you have them. So giving land back is number 5, but is like top. Just let us have the land back. But you can't do that giving any resources that you do have to Indigenous people and reaching out and saying like, what do you need? I'm in your homeland. How can I help? include Indigenous people and Lenape people and Lenape-Hoking here from the beginning. Often Indigenous folks are brought on to like do a land acknowledgement or are very much like a second thought because colonialism has made us an afterthought in everyone's mind. But, and so like to break that, including Indigenous folks from the beginning in really intentional ways is necessary if folks are wanting to do social justice work or wanting to, even outside of like social justice, or just wanting to create right relations with the people and with the land that you're on and the place that you're in. Honoring Indigenous sovereignty, which goes back to the right to move, the right to be, the right to be the initial stewards of the land and have that recognized is extremely important. Like I said, giving the land back in a really literal way. People think that this is, it seems very upfront, but people think that it's not. But it's like literally, if you are on land and you have the ability to give that back to people, which you do if you're on it, give that land back to the stewards who know how to take care of it, who will ensure that it lasts because they have been ensuring that it lasts from time immemorial. And educate yourself throughout. A lot of people have already said that, but continuing to educate, continuing to learn. I learn something new about this land every time that I sit with a Lenape person and have the opportunity to learn from them. And so continuing to do that education, continuing to build those relationships so that you can be in better relationship with the ecosystem as a whole. So yeah, I think that's all. Thank you so much for letting us present here.